you for joining in on Stenzel's podcast, Find Hope, Live Well. If you're a frequent listener, welcome back. If you are new here, welcome. We are happy to have you. Today we are joined by one of Stenzel's very own therapists, Alex Goreham. Alex is a supervisor and a licensed clinical social worker here at Stenzel. Hi, Alex.
Hey, Callie, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Oh, pretty good.
Awesome. Yeah, I know that you have a lot to do with play therapy here at Stenzel. You also specialize in trauma, EMDR, and you are a certified drug and alcohol counselor. So can you tell our listeners kind of like how you got into counseling and where it all started?
Yeah. Well, hey, first, thanks for having me. I'm kind of excited to do this podcast. So I got into counseling, a few years ago, and actually what happened was I actually had a dream. Kind of sounds crazy, but it wasn't anything too out there. I was actually in school for nursing. I got my bachelor's in psychology, and I was wanted to get another bachelor's in nursing. I worked at a trauma center doing medical stuff, and I was kind of just trying to figure out what direction I wanted to do. I loved counseling. I loved therapy, but I knew I needed a master's. And I realized it was going to take me another 4 years to get another bachelor's. And I was just kind of like, okay, well, kind of praying about, hey, God, kind of give me a direction here. And what I wanted to do medically was to be a flight nurse. And so I was taking classes for nursing school. And I actually had a dream where I was flying in a helicopter as a flight nurse. And nothing crazy happened. And I just remember looking out the window to my right. And it was the most beautiful sunset I've ever seen. And in that moment, I felt empty. And when I woke up, I kind of knew, okay, that's not the right path. Doesn't mean there was a bad job or anything like that, but I kind of knew in that moment that, okay, counseling is the way to go. So I dropped out of all my classes, and I applied to Loyola for their master's in social work, and I got in. So that's kind of what got me to counseling and psychology and being a therapist.
Wow, that's definitely a unique story. So do you think like that dream was kind of a sign from God?
You know what? Yeah, I do think it was a sign from God. I kind of wanted to go the medical route, and I just wasn't sure. And I made a choice, and I remember kind of asking God, hey, if you want me to go into counseling, you have to make it clear. And if you don't make it clear, I'm going to go the medical route. And then I had this dream, and I just kind of knew.
So since you specialize a lot in play therapy, like going on the website and seeing all the counselors, what they specialize in, and play therapy is pretty up there. Also visiting your room, seeing all of the toys and everything, you're super passionate about it. So what led you to play therapy specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question, Callie. So really my whole idea of when I was looking at becoming a counselor, I looked at what do I want to specialize in? And I kind of landed on trauma. And so play therapy is the intervention that we use with kids. The reality is that we can all go through a traumatic situation no matter what age we are. The difference with kids is that they don't have the cognitive ability to say, oh, hey, I felt unsafe, I felt manipulated, I felt out of control. And so what play therapy allows the child to do in the therapy session is to actually play that out. What happens is play therapy is a natural language, right? And so that's how kids communicate. And if you think about maybe when you were growing up, right? Did somebody have to teach you how to play, right? You just kind of did it naturally, right? Yeah. With your siblings or with friends in the neighborhood. It's really the same idea here, is that child-centered play therapy allows the kid to have control in the therapy space. And they really get to pick what they want to play through. And our job as a therapist is not to interpret what they're playing through, but is to reflect and to track what they're doing. So that way we can kind of bring to the forefront of their mind, hey, this is what's happening, this is what they're feeling, and this is what we're witnessing.
Yeah, it's definitely like a different type of therapy. Like before coming into Stenzel, like I didn't know that even existed before meeting you. So it's interesting to learn about for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
So you said that you kind of worked in like the trauma field before. With trauma therapy, is it just kind of like a specialized trauma, or is it trauma all around the board?
Yeah, so it really is all around the board. Trauma is it's like an umbrella term, right? And under the umbrella, you can have like complex trauma. And complex trauma would be maybe somebody who's being assaulted by a loved one through 4 or 5 years, and then you kind of have lowercase trauma where it might be one car accident or a fight that you were in. And so, under the umbrella term of trauma, you have all these different experiences. And so, as I was looking at getting into being a trauma informed therapist, I really asked myself, what can I do to be able to help kids, teenagers, grown ups, and adults? And that's kind of what led me to play therapy because, again, I'm not going to sit with a 5-year-old for a 1 hour session and talk about their feelings because they're not going to be able to do that. So that's why I do play therapy with kids. I specialize in chemical dependency because the reality is that oftentimes when we go through difficult situations like a traumatic event, we might self-medicate with drugs or with alcohol or with other, we call them kind of process addictions. It can be gambling or it can be, various other activities. And that again kind of makes trauma response complex. And then I also do EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization. That's a pretty long word, and reprocessing. And it was created in the late 1980s by somebody called Francis Shapiro. And this is a therapy where we try to help the client reprocess how they think of who they are and how they think back to a certain traumatic event. And so as I look back, I wanted to be able to say, no matter what age the kid or the client was, I wanted to look back and say, look, I was able to help these kids deal with their traumatic event.
Yeah, I also saw, you also showed me that, what is that light called that's used?
Oh, the light bar, yeah. So you're talking about the light bar for EMDR. Yeah, so when EMDR was initially created, we would have to use our hand, and we would have the client follow the hand back and forth. Now in this day and age, I want to give my clients more space, and so I use this light bar, and the light bar kind of recreates it's really called, we're doing something called bilateral brain stimulation. It sounds way scarier than it actually is. All it is we are introducing a stimuli to each side of the brain. By either having you follow a light from one side to the other with your eyes, or I give you buzzers, and then you have it buzzes back and forth from your right hand to your left hand. Or we can even have you put on some headphones, and it goes beep, beep, beep. Those kind of like hearing tests that we all had to do in elementary school. And so the whole idea of this is, and they don't know why it works. I just think it's really cool that we were created in the way that our brains can heal from trauma. And they realize that if we recreate the REM sleep cycle, so the REM sleep cycle is called rapid eye movement, and that's a part of our sleep that we process how the day is going. So they realized through research and studies that if we don't get good REM sleep, we kind of feel like crap. And they realized that, hey, if we kind of recreate this process while you're awake, it actually helps reprocess how you think back to traumatic events. And again, they don't know why it works, but they can look at PET scans, they've done functional MRIs, where they look at the activity of the brain before EMDR and after EMDR, and they can see a pretty significant change, which is really cool.
Yeah, I think that's awesome that you guys are using technology to prove and use as a resource with kids or anyone that needs to use it at Stenzel, just because you always want data to back up your case, and I think it's just really helpful. So I had one more question for you, and that was on the website it states that you're a certified drug and alcohol counselor. I was just wondering what it took for you to get that certification. Did you have to go to school? Did you do an online course?
Yeah, good question. So I took one class while I was in grad school, and I liked it. And then I actually took 4 more additional classes as part of the certification certificate. Postgraduate at a community college. And then after that, I had to do an internship. I can't remember how many hours it was. I think it was like 300 hours or something. And then after that, I had to sit in for a test. Awesome. And then kind of passed it. And it was through the Illinois Certification Board. And yeah.
Cool. Yes. All this information is super awesome, especially to the fact that we want our listeners to know more about the therapists at Stenzel and kind of where they came from. So your story is definitely very unique, and we're happy to have you here at Stenzel Clinical.
Awesome. Thank you.
One more thing. So to wrap this up, what would you give to our listeners, a word of advice or just one thing you would want them to know?
Yeah, that's a great question, Callie. I think one of the great things that we all focus on here at Stenzel is this idea of being unashamed and unafraid to seek help. As you know, obviously, we're coming out of a pretty crazy year with the COVID pandemic and all these other things throughout the country that has just really significantly impacted the mental health of not just adults, but teenagers, older adults, kids. And one thing that we focus on here is we want to destigmatize the notion of mental health. Your emotional well-being is a huge part of your life. And there's no shame in being able to say, hey, you know what, I'm really struggling here, and I want to go and talk to somebody who can help me understand what I'm feeling, why I'm feeling. I often tell my clients when I first meet them that, hey, I don't have the power to change you, and I would not want that power. If I did, I don't know what I would do with that. My job as a therapist is to help clients learn more about who they are, where they've been, and where they want to go, and to help them, empower them to make the changes that they need to make for a healthier and happier life. So, yeah.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alex.
Thank you. Yeah.
Of course.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. Visit stenzelclinical.com/staff to learn more about our excellent therapists at Stenzel. You can also find us on social media with the handle @StenzelClinical for helpful daily tips. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.